Welcome back to the garden. If you are new here, I'm so glad you found your way in. This is Sprouted Reflections of Issa Rose, a soul retrieval journey. Not a self-help show, a real walk through the terrain of fragmentation toward wholeness, using story as the map, modality as the language, and the Trinity of Self as the mirror. You are welcome here exactly where you are. The petals and the thorns, the sunshine and the soil. The garden holds it all. I am Issa Rose Sophia, a garden guide in the Trinity of Self, the integrated self at the center of this work. We are the triple goddess, 3 voices, 3 lenses, 1 journey towards soul retrieval. You can learn more about the full Trinity of Self and the Soul Integration Framework, our 3 lenses, the Shamanic Soul Retrieval, Jungian Shadow Work, and Internal Family Systems at sproutfromdarkness.com. A lot of what we discuss here lives there. For those of you who have been walking with us since the spring equinox, you know the ground we have covered. 4 episodes, many layers. Soul purpose retrieval through integration is the foundation, the understanding that you are not broken, you are fragmented. Soul loss is what happens when unbearable trauma causes pieces of the psyche to separate, to leave, to hide, to freeze in the moment of the wound. Those parts do not disappear. They wait, and the work of soul integration is learning to recognize them, call them home, and weave them back into wholeness. That original essence is not something you build from scratch. It is something you return to. Shamanic soul retrieval is our first lens, the oldest language on earth for what happens when a facet of your being decides it is not safe to stay. When an experience is so overwhelming that the self splinters to survive it. Ancient traditions across every continent have named this. They held a ceremony around it, built entire healing practices to call those fragmented pieces home. We did not discover fragmentation. We just forgot the language for it. In episode 2, we discussed our first lens, the shamanic soul retrieval, and our first soul loss experience. The Jungian shadow was our second lens, Carl Jung's map of the psyche and the parts we push into the dark because the primary self was not safely held. The rejected self, the explosive emotions, the protector that the world called dangerous, and the framework calls necessary. Individuation, Jung's word for the lifelong process of integrating what has been split off. And this is not optional. What we do not integrate, we project. What we do not name runs us. We discussed that in our 3rd episode. In our last episode, our 3rd lens was on the internal family systems, developed by Dr. Richard Swartz. It gives language to what survivors already knew in their bodies. The psyche is not singular. We are made of parts. Exiles who carry the pain, managers who work hard to keep that pain from surfacing, firefighters who rush in when it breaks through anyway. And underneath all of them, the self, carrying the 8 C's: calmness, curiosity, clarity, compassion, confidence, courage, creativity, and connectedness. All present, not damaged, never destroyed. Still there. There are no bad parts, only parts running impossible jobs without support, without relief, without anyone ever asking what they were protecting. And the spirituality of IFS goes even further, recognizing that this work is not just psychological, it is sacred, always has been, and forever will be. Dr. Swartz identifies layers that include what shamanic traditions call soul loss, what spiritual traditions identify as spiritual warfare, and what many survivors describe as something that feels bigger than the wound itself. The self is not just a clinical concept. It is what every wisdom tradition has been pointing to. the Imago Dei, the Buddha nature, the Christ consciousness, the divine spark of the soul that cannot be destroyed or created, only buried. Each of our lenses was also a mirror, not just a framework for my story, but a framework for yours. The origin of this journey is ours, and your wholeness is the destination. Today, episode 5, we are going into something that every single person listening has lived in some form: the alter ego. The name you stepped into when the real self did not feel safe. The version of you that showed up in rooms the authentic self could not enter. The mask that was never just vanity, it was armor. It was architecture. It was your psyche's most intelligent, available solution to an impossible problem. We are going to look at the psychology behind it, the peer-reviewed research, the clinical framework, the documented mechanism, and then we are going to walk it through our testimony. The names, the fragments, the parts of the self that we're reaching through every chapter, every alias, every survival season, towards something they could not yet name. If this is your first time in our garden, join us also on Facebook at the Sprouted Soul Reflections I Am. The full ecosystem lives at sproutfromdarkness.com. All right, let's grow. I want to start with a name you probably know: Beyoncé. In 2008, she gave an interview with Oprah Winfrey that people remember for something she described, a version of herself that showed up when the music started. She talked about the moment before a performance, when the nerves are real, the pressure is enormous, and the audience is anxious, and the expectations are epic. And she said that when she put on the stilettos and heard the chords, something shifted. A different version of her appeared. Posture different, voice different. The way she held space in a room, completely different. She named her Sasha Fierce. Now, before I go further, I want to address something clearly. Beyoncé was not describing a psychological disorder. She was not describing pathology. She was not describing the kind of alter ego that develops without choice. The one trauma builds for you before you even know what is happening. That experience is real, valid, and also part of this conversation. We will get there. What she's describing is something that academic researchers have studied, documented, and given a name to. An alter ego. An alter ego, from the Latin meaning other self. In psychology, this is a second, distinct persona adopted to unlock dormant traits such as confidence, courage, or creativity. It functions as a form of psychological distancing, allowing individuals to bypass self-doubt, anxiety, or social pressures by acting through a different, more empowered identity. Psychological distancing is a cognitive emotion regulation technique. It involves stepping back from immediate, intense emotions to view a situation from a more objective observer perspective by creating mental space through time, perspective, or identity. Doing so, individuals can reduce anxiety, decrease stress, and interrupt negative thought spirals. Okay, so that is the clinical definition. Now, let me show you what it looks like in practice. A social psychology researcher at the University of Minnesota named Celina Furman has written that all of us, yes, every single one of us, could benefit emotionally in terms of regulation, self-control, and what she calls general poise from doing exactly what Beyoncé and many others have done. The technique of consciously embodying another persona in high-pressure moments and choosing who shows up rather than defaulting to an internal wound. This is not just a celebrity anecdote. It has been documented in research with children. In 2016, a professor named Stephanie Carlson at the Institute of Child Development at the University of Minnesota ran a study that has since become known in psychology circles as the Batman effect. She gave a group of 5-year-olds a boring task. One they were told was very important and they would be rewarded for completing. She divided them into groups. One group was asked to check in with themselves in the first person. Am I working hard? Another group was given the option to take on a fictional hero's identity. In this case, it was Batman. And instead, they asked themselves, what would Batman do? Whenever they felt the urge to stop, whenever the task felt too hard, whenever the impulse to quit showed up, the results were clear. Children who adopted the Batman persona performed as if they were a year older than they actually were. Not because Batman made them smarter, not because pretending solved the problem, because the persona created distance. Distance between the self and the unbearable task. Distance between the feeling and the reaction. Distance between the impulse and the choice. Dr. Rachel White, an assistant professor of psychology at Hamilton College in New York, describes it this way. Self-distancing gives us a little bit of extra space to think rationally about the situation. It allows us to keep feelings like anxiety and impatience in check while increasing our level of self-control and determination. Kyle D. Guzman, a writer and scholar of narrative theory, adds that an alter ego serves as a psychological space for projecting parts of the self that are hidden or suppressed, allowing individuals to explore dimensions of their character that cannot safely exist in daily life. Batman and Bruce Wayne, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Hannah Montana and Miley Stewart. These are not just pop culture references. They are cultural shorthand for something every human being understands intuitively. The mask we wear, the roles we play, the versions of ourselves that we bring into different rooms. Sophia Isabel Kavlin, writing in Illumination on Medium, puts it plainly. We all curate our identities to fit into different groups. Our persona varies according to different social situations. The problem is that we are usually unaware of how malleable our personality actually is, but consciously shaping that malleability, consciously choosing which version of ourselves steps into a given space, can do powerful things for emotional regulation, for silencing negative feedback, for self-protection. She describes psychological distancing as putting some distance between yourself and the problem at hand. It allows us to observe and analyze our feelings toward an event and choose the best way to act, rather than reacting from impulse. Now, I want you to hold all of that in one hand. Research, clinical framework, the Batman effect, Beyoncé, Latin etymology, the academic understanding of the alter ego as a documented, intelligent, adaptive human mechanism used by performers and 5-year-olds and scholars and survivors alike, consciously or not, chosen, forged, empowered, or survival built. And I want you to hold something else in the other hand. What happens when the environment requiring the alter ego is not a stage, a research study, or a difficult professional moment? But what if it's exploitation, poverty, addiction, systemic involvement since childhood? That kind of layered marginalization that does not show up in a psychology journal as a research variable. It shows up as a case number. What happens to the alter ego then? It does not become less intelligent. It does not become less protective. It becomes more urgent, more load-bearing, more costly. And the parts running the persona, the manager in IFS language, the shadow expression in the Jungian language, the soul fragment in the shamanic language, they're doing the same thing Batman did for those 5-year-olds, creating distance between the self and the unbearable. Asking, what does this version of me do to survive this? Ask yourself right now. And I mean, really reflect on this. Have you ever had a name you used that was not your given name? Have you ever shown up somewhere as a version of yourself that the people who loved you may not have recognized? Have you ever put on a persona so completely that for a moment, maybe for a long moment, you forgot there was something, someone, yourself underneath it? That is the psyche doing its job. And today, we are going to honor that. We are going to look at it clearly And we are going to ask, what was it protecting? If this is planting something in you, share this episode with someone who needs to hear that what they did to survive was not pathology. That is how this garden grows. Drop a comment below and tell us what resonated. That is the teaching. Let's walk through the testimony. I need you to understand something before I give you the details. Without the arc, it just becomes another tragic story, and this is not that. This is a testimony, and those are not the same. I was born in Springfield, Massachusetts. I was 21 in 2007 when I gave birth to my oldest son in Odessa, Texas. He's nearly 19 now, this month in April, when this episode is being released. And well, in 2010, I moved back to Massachusetts from Texas. Life kept moving the way life moves when you are a survivor who has never had a proper landing, always in motion, always adapting, always finding the next way through. Last week, we walked through the working names: Ruby, Honey, Rosa, Karma. Each one considered a IFS manager, each one a face worn for each room that required surviving, each one a fragment of the self, reaching. Even in the dark, between those working names and the one I carried in 2018, there were chapters where I was also reaching towards something legitimate, pursuing education, earning credentials, trying to build a stable professional life, and secure home for my children. In 2011, while pregnant with my middle son, I got my Administrative Health Specialist certificate from Porter and Chester Institute, building towards a career in healthcare administration, trying to plant roots in something that could hold a family. My middle son was born February 2012. By March 2012, 1 month later, I was a resident at the YWCA DV shelter, the same organization I would return to as a volunteer and then get hired in the same shelter as a direct service advocate exactly 10 years later, leading to me being promoted to a human trafficking support specialist and then domestic violence and SA counselor. Around 2015, my youngest son was born, and shortly after, I got my Massachusetts real estate license. Another door towards stability, living inside the same loop of toxic, abusive relationships that had been running underneath everything all along. And I'm going to be truthful about what happened to it all. The real estate license expired in 2018, the same year I was arrested. With the charges that followed, whether I could even renew it became a question I could not answer. Whether I even wanted to became a different question entirely. And my children, they were not just temporarily disrupted, they were taken from me. For years. My youngest, I have not seen him since fall of 2019. That is not a footnote. That is a wound still open, and it belongs to the story we will tell on Mother's Day weekend and our season finale, because that story deserves its own space and its own honoring. So yeah, some of it did disappear. Some of it was taken. Some of it expired along with the chapter it belonged to. However, the education, the certificates, the licenses, the reaching towards something stable, none of it was wasted, but none of it was enough to outrun a nervous system that had never been shown, or given the healing it needed to make stability stay. Chaos was so normalized that normal felt like chaos. And that is what unaddressed trauma does. It does not just take the dark moments. It takes the credentials, the licenses, and the babies, and the fresh starts too. Yet still, something kept reaching. By 2018, I had 3 children and was a single mother, working part-time as a personal care attendant for my Nana, while in active addiction that I thought I was hiding not very well, and had been building for years across multiple chapters of a life that had never known the skills to metabolize pain in any other way. Earlier that year, spring 2018, I had moved in with my best friend, someone who loved me and saw through me clearly. She told me specifically, "Do not rent cars in your name for him." She did not know the full scope. Neither did I. She saw a piece of it, and she spoke on what she saw, and she was right. And I did not listen. I usually didn't. The him in that sentence was a man I had connected with when I moved back home from Texas. By 2018, that involvement had become something I did not have full visibility into. I was using the name Serenity Delve when I was in that world. It was a name I used on an adult platform called Skip the Games. It was the first time in my adult life that I worked through that type of agency with online ads. And those of you who have been in that world or who have worked with people who have, you might understand what I mean when I say there were layers I could not fully see from where I was standing. I did not know he had been under federal investigation for approximately 2 years before my arrest. I did not know he had attempted to recruit an undercover officer. I did not know there were recorded conversations between him and a woman who was incarcerated at the women's jail in Chicopee. Conversations about recruiting women from inside that facility. I knew none of that. What I did know was that I was a mother in active addiction. In survival mode, using the tools surviving had taught me, wearing a name that was not mine, moving through a world I had been taught to navigate before I was old enough to consent to learning it. In IFS terms, the part of me running as Serenity Delve, as we mentioned, was a manager, just like Ruby, just like Honey, just like Rosa and Karma. Each one holding the external presentation together so the exile underneath could make it one more day. Serenity Delve was the last in line of managers, the most recent mask the psyche reached for when it needed to function in a world that was asking too much of the real self, of the whole self. What made her different was the timing. She was the one holding the face when everything finally broke open, managing a life with no stable ground underneath it, and doing it the only way she knew how. And there is something else that belongs in this testimony, something I am not going to smooth the edges of. I was labeled as the enforcer in the investigation because I had assaulted 2 women. I need to hold that honestly. Not to excuse it, but to name it in the way a trauma-informed lens names it. I was trying to get paid in a way that felt more within my control than the alternative. The logic of survival, even brutal survival, has its own internal architecture. That does not make it right. It makes it human. It makes it a manager doing the only job she knew how to do in the only way she had ever been shown. And when that was not enough, when control slipped, the shadow came in, the fiercer one, the one who technically had not been named yet, the firefighter. On December 5th, 2018, I was arrested. The charges was conspiracy to sex trafficking and conspiracy to sex trafficking across state lines. And here's what the courts did not really account for. I was also a survivor of CSEC, commercial sexual exploitation of a child, since the age of 14. That history did not simply disappear because I turned 18. It lived in the body. It stayed with the parts. It shaped every decision made from inside the wreckage of it. I was prosecuted as a perpetrator for the charges I was also, in another timeline, a survivor of. And I want to be tender with whoever is in this episode right now because some of you know exactly what that feels like. To be on both sides of a line that the legal system draws as if it were clean, but it's not, because trauma is not clean. I spent 30 days at the Wyatt Detention Center in Rhode Island. I was 33 years old, and I do not think that number was an accident. The fullness of what happened at Wyatt belongs to the upcoming book, but I need to give you the spiritual thread because it does not start at Wyatt. It starts years before. There had been a prophetic word spoken over my life when I was a teenager. The mother of an ex-boyfriend came to pick him up from my parents' house. She looked at me and said, "You are here to do great things, and I'm not talking about with my son or with any man. You are here to do great things." And then they just left. I never really thought about it much until around November 2018, right before the arrest. I went back to it. I was at a rough rock bottom, back involved in this lifestyle with 3 kids living in a hotel. I asked my aunt, what did she mean by that? What could that have possibly meant? My aunt said, maybe it's your kids, like something you bring into this world. And I said, but she told me that I am here to do great things. Although my aunt was not entirely wrong, because I am birthing something into this world. And here we are, sharing our baby with you. Shortly after that conversation, God answered. I cannot get into the full encounter here. That belongs to what is coming. But I will tell you what happened at Wyatt. There was a woman who came to visit to host a Bible study in the jail. When she entered the main chow room, the sunlight from the window shone right on her. I put my head down to pray, and an inmate invited me into the Bible study. She informed me that she already knew I was going to join and that she would have a message for me. It was multiple messages. One of them was this: you are here to help people with your experiences. December 2018, my first Christmas away from my kids and family, facing federal time and incarcerated in a detention center in Rhode Island, on the other side of everything that had tried to consume me, and a stranger confirming what a teenager's prophecy had already said. Now, I don't believe in coincidences. That is confirmation. On December 28th, 2018, I was released on the ankle bracelet to the Hope Center through Behavioral Health Network, which is the same organization I now work for. Clinical Stabilization Services, Springfield, Massachusetts, 24/7 care, 30 days, and then a halfway house, also through BHN. There, at my sister's house, we said the Serenity Prayer every single day. The house went to AA and NA meetings and conventions. I started therapy, went back to the church my mother had told me about years ago, a church I had first walked into around 2012 during the DV relationship around the birth of my middle son. There had been prophetic things that happened before, and I went back. They happened again. More messages, more confirmations, more of what the teenager's prophecy had already said, spoken over me again in different seasons by different people in a different year, but the same message, that story, those encounters, what is still unfolding, what I'm still processing. What is still being integrated is to be continued. Some of it later this season, some of it is in what comes after. But something else happened at the halfway house that belongs here too. In 2019, I started writing music again. I had written poetry and songs as a little girl. Words were always how I processed what I could not speak out loud. But at the halfway house, something different came through. My shadow had a lot to say. All those years, all those names, all that survival weight. It came out as lyrics. Rhymes I could not stop. Hymns with fangs. And there was a sister at the halfway house who noticed. She started calling me Lyrical Glamsta because I was always recording myself, rhyming, always pouring something out. I shortened it to Lyrica. And for the first time, the forming fierce one from age 12, the protector, had a name. She was not Lucia yet. That name is coming. Lyrical Glamsta was her first acknowledgement. The first time that part was seen and named as something with value. On May 27th, 2019, still on the ankle bracelet, still in early recovery, I made my first Instagram post. The caption was, I will love the light because it shows me the way, yet I will endure the darkness because it shows me the stars. I did not know yet what I was building. It was my truth. July 27th, 2019, I posted a photo. The huge federal bracelet was visibly on my ankle. Fall 2019, I ended up getting kicked out of my sister's house program, and that was the last time I saw my youngest son. I did not know that at the time. What I know now, and what will be the heart of our season 2 finale on Mother's Day weekend, is that story. The perceived continual betrayals, the broken threads, the integration, and the healing are still in progress. After the halfway house, I was transferred to Fall River Stepping Stone, only briefly because I got kicked out of there also, and then sent to Boston, to the EVA House, a safe house. and survivor-led emergency shelter run by the EVA Center for Women Exiting the Sex Trade and Commercial Sexual Exploitation, founded and operated by survivors. We had former survivors come in and share their testimony. And just like the survivor-based stories at the NA and AA meetings, each one was truly a transformative seed. While I was there at the EVA Center, I was awaiting sentencing to be convicted and charged as a felon. 4 charges I was also a survivor of. If you are still here, drop a comment. Tell us what you recognize in yourself. You do not have to share the whole story, even just one word. The garden is listening. And if this episode is reclaiming something in you, share it with someone who needs it. That one share might be the thing that their self has been waiting for too. Here's a contradiction I want to sit with for a moment. We opened this episode with Beyoncé, with Celina Furman's research on psychological distancing, with the Batman effect, with Kyle de Guzman's definition, with Sophia Isabel Kavling's framework, with peer-reviewed evidence that the alter ego is a documented, intelligent, adaptive human mechanism used by performers, 5-year-olds, scholars, and survivors alike. The same mechanism, consciously or not, chosen or forged, empowered or survival built. The same mechanism, completely different context, at completely different cost. And all of it, the psyche doing exactly what it was designed to do. That is the contradiction we are crowning here. The alter ego is not inherently empowering or inherently traumatic. It is a tool, and what it builds depends entirely on the foundation it is working with. Ruby, Honey, Rosa, Karma, Serenity Delve, each one a manager, each one a form of psychological distancing. Each one is a fragment of the self doing the only thing it knew how to do with the tools it had in the season it was in. This is not damage. This is the beginning of the persona work. Here's what I now know that I did not know then. The same capacity that allowed me to step into those names, to choose a face, to hold a presentation, to move through a room as someone other than the wounded self, that same dynamic is what eventually built the triple goddess Trinity of Self. Gypsy Jinx Nix, the exiled inner child reclaimed, the earth angel who had been living under every working name, reaching toward the light even in the darkest chapters. Lucia de Lilith, the fierce protector, the shadow that kept us alive when survival required something the light could not do alone. Issa Rose Sophia, the integrated self, the redeemed rememberer, standing here, holding the map, walking you through your own terrain on your hero's journey. The survival mask became the sovereign guide, not the alter ego abandoned. The alter ego evolved, not Serenity Delve or any other parts forgotten, honored for what they were protecting underneath all along. That is what soul purpose retrieval actually looks like. Not the wound erased, the wound alchemized. The fragments forming through every name, every season, every rock bottom into something the self could finally recognize as its own. And I want to say this directly to anyone carrying a working name, or who carried one, or who recognizes themselves in any part of what I described in this episode. Your alter ego is the seed of your sovereignty, the part of you that keeps something alive until the soul can retrieve it. The question is, what were all of them protecting that was worth bringing home? They were protecting this, all of this, and they can rest now because we are here and the self knows the way. That is the work. That is how we tend our inner garden. If you enjoy this video, engage with us. It tells the algorithms that this kind of content matters, and it does. And so do you. So for the final name, Serenity Delve, which means to search and dig for peace, chosen in one of the darkest chapters of my adult life without consciously knowing what it meant. Without knowing, it was living prophecy. Every name before it was also reaching, also searching, also a fragment of the soul moving towards something it could not yet identify or individualize. And here I am, on the other side of all of it, doing the work of soul integration, studying the spirituality of IFS with Dr. Richard Swartz on a scholarship through the Sounds True Foundation, working at the very organization that gave me my first stable landing after the arrest, Behavioral Health Network, BHN, just as I once worked at the YWCA after being a resident there with my children. That is now a pattern. And I'm starting to think it was always written in the stars. Writing, teaching, recording, still searching, but now I know what I'm digging for, and I know how to dig without destroying parts of me in the process. That is redemption. This week's reflection prompt: what alter ego have you been carrying? What name given to you or chosen by you do you step into when the real self feels unsafe? What does that version of you know how to do that you have not yet claimed as your own? What is she or he or they protecting underneath? Not what they did wrong. What are they protecting? Reflect on that. Write it down. Bring it to the garden. And the blog post for this episode is on sproutfromdarkness.com on the Gathered Fragments page. On our website, you can also find the free 7-day soul retrieval journal. Download it, 7 prompts, 1 door back to yourself. We're also approaching the 1-year anniversary of our 31-day Soul Spiral Journal, the Mental Health Awareness Special Edition. You can purchase it directly at Gypsy Emporium on Amazon. The link is in the description. A full month of deep inner garden tending built from this framework. If you want to go deeper into IFS, Dr. Richard Swartz's book, No Bad Parts, is a great place to start. And if you feel called to the spirituality of IFS through Sounds True Foundation, that link is in the description too. And this is not sponsored. I got a scholarship and I love the work that they're doing, and I highly recommend it. If you or someone you know is in or exiting the sex trade and needs support, the EVA Center in Boston at evacenter.org, survivor-led, safe, and real. Behavioral Health Network serves Western Mass and parts of Eastern Mass. bhnworks.org. The National Human Trafficking Hotline is 1-888-373-7888. And for RAINN, RAINN, 1-800-656-HOPE. That's 1-800-656-HOPE. Sprouted Reflections of Issa Rose airs on both YouTube channels. Sprout from Darkness is the teaching and framework. Issa Rose Petals and Thorns is the testimony and persona. Subscribe to both. The Sprouted Reflections of Issa Rose podcast lives on both channels. It is always clinical and testimonial, teaching and story woven together. That is by design. This summer, the garden expands into visual content. Stay with us to be a part of what is blooming next. And if this episode moved something in you, share it, leave a comment, tell someone in your circle that the garden is here. Before we go, next week, the exiled inner child. She steps forward. Jackie Rose turned Gypsy Jinx Nix. The psychology behind her naming, her disorganized attachment, the fawning response, and the arcane parallel that is going to change the way you see the wounded inner child forever. And then name it. And the name itself, the Jinx, it's not a cage, it's a crown. If you have been patient, and I appreciate those who have, thank you. That patience will be rewarded. I am Issa Rose Sophia Ramos. This is Sprout from Darkness, Soul Purpose Retrieval, Overcoming Unaddressed Trauma. We are in Season 2, Episode 5. Thank you for joining us at Sprouted Reflections of Issa Rose. We are building something real in this garden. Together, we will see you in the next Sprouted Reflection.